So one of the ways Christian nationalists have tried to get their religion into public schools, and we've seen this all over the country at this point, is they are trying to get religious chaplains into public schools. Sometimes they're just saying, hey, why don't you allow religious chaplains to work in your schools alongside the trained professionals, the counselors, the social workers? In some places, though, they're saying you could bring in these chaplains in lieu of trained social workers and counselors, and that's very disturbing. So anytime and Texas has done this, Florida has done this, allowing school districts to bring chaplains into their buildings. And now Arizona Republicans are trying to do the exact same thing. And there's a twist to this story that I want to share with you that's really disturbing. But basically, what's happening is that Senate Bill 1269, which is sponsored by a state senator named Wendy Rogers, who happens to be a white nationalist who perpetuates the Great Replacement theory, not a fan of immigrants. She's sponsoring this bill that would allow school districts to bring chaplains into their buildings as volunteers. Now, the bill that she wrote does have a few caveats in it. Parents have to give permission before their kids can meet with these chaplains. Parents would be given a list of which chaplains are at their school along with their religious affiliation, so you could pick your favorites like it's a menu item or something like that. And I feel like before I go on, I should tell you, if this is your first time hearing about this sort of thing, why is this a bad thing? Like, why would it be bad to have a very experienced chaplain in the building for whoever wants to see the chaplain? Well, in Arizona, where the chaplains would need some minimal qualifications, which is useful, it still sends the message that religious affiliations somehow outweigh professional credentials. Like a conservative Christian chaplain with years of experience may still not know how to deal with people who don't share his beliefs. And he could offer his solutions that impose his personal mythology on students, even if that's not what the evidence says will help them. Like, trained social workers, trained counselors are taught to help all students. Religious chaplains are basically told to help their people. And that's what's disturbing. That's one of many things that's disturbing about this. That's actually what one lobbyist said to the lawmakers when they were debating this bill. This is from the Arizona Mirror. Gael Esposito, a lobbyist for the ACLU of Arizona, told committee members on Tuesday that school counselors are required to undergo specialized training to prepare them to help students, requirements that religious chaplains would not have to meet, even though they'd be providing similar services. They will simply not be equipped to support students dealing with serious matters like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, self-harm, suicidal ideation. Religious training is not a substitute for academic and professional training in counseling, healthcare, or mental health. Even with the best intentions, chaplains may provide inappropriate responses or interventions that could harm students. I mean, that's very well said. You can imagine how bad it would be if some kid was questioning their sexual identity or their gender identity, sexual orientation, or gender identity, and maybe their parents are like, there's something wrong with my kid. Hey, I want you to see the chaplain who's at your school. And this kid opens up to the chaplain. And the chaplain says, oh, you might be gay? Well, I'll tell you what, you don't have to be. And then tries to do some conversion therapy shit. Like, this could end very badly for a lot of people because these chaplains don't necessarily know what they are doing. I'm not even disparaging chaplains. Some of them are very, very good at what they do, but they're not qualified for this job just because they have the title. So that bill that was offered, that did pass in the state Senate. The vote was 17-12. So now it's in the state House. And at least when they were discussing this bill in the House Education Committee, there was some pushback. So, for example, one Democrat asked about church-state separation in all of this. And I'm going to play for you what that discussion was. And this is between a Democrat, State Representative Stephanie Simicek, and the Republican State Senator Wendy Rogers.
A simple question. To me, when I read through this bill, I just see unconstitutional. I see it as unconstitutional to invite religious leaders to engage in religious activities at school. And I would like to ask what happened to separation between church and state.
There's nowhere that's written. There should be a separation of church and state. For one, that's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. So that's kind of a myth to base it on. And by the way, if I may add, it is constitutional, or it wouldn't have gone through rules at the Senate.
So what Wendy Rogers is saying there is that, don't worry, separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. Yeah, the phrase is not in the Constitution, but the concept very much is, and courts have repeatedly enforced that for decades and decades. So she's just flat out wrong about that. And then the dumbest thing she said came after that when she said, I mean, if this thing was illegal, the Republicans on the Rules Committee would never have approved it. Are you kidding me? You think Republicans give a shit about what the Constitution says? No. No, they will approve anything if it satisfies their extremist base. All right, let me show you another clip. There was a Republican state representative, David Marshall, who wanted to chime in to say, I like this bill. And he didn't even bother trying to make a secular argument for why he liked it. This is a short clip, but check out what he said.
Are there some good psychologists? I'm sure there are. But I think Jesus is a lot better than any psychologist. So for those reasons, I vote aye.
I think Jesus is a lot better than any psychologist. So let's get chaplains in the building and not actual trained professionals. Like, oh my God. So one Democrat pointed out that, if you want to help students, you should get them better mental health support. And that requires more funding for trained professionals. The Education Committee's chairman, his name is Matt Gress, he said, you guys, we don't need to spend money on trained professionals because what these kids need is more Jesus. Here's what he said.
I can't tell you how much this committee and me personally, I've heard that there is a mental health crisis afflicting kids. Now, I don't necessarily think in many of these cases that something is medically wrong with kids. I think perhaps there is a spiritual deficit that needs to be addressed.
Spiritual. What he says we need is more spirituality. There's a spiritual deficit, and we have to fix that. I mean, it's the same answer they give whenever there's a mass shooting. We don't need to do anything about the guns. Let's just get kids more Jesus. That'll fix the problem. Like, all of these Republicans would rather ignore what every expert says because they just like treating kids as target practice. Like, Christianity is the ammo and they want it in schools. And that bill did get through the House Education Committee on a 7-5 vote. So now we're waiting for the full Arizona House to vote on this bill. But the thing that really disturbed me, because right now this bill, as it was introduced, would merely allow school districts to have chaplains in the building if they wanted to. But I want you to see what Matt Gress proposed as an amendment. Check this out. There's a lot going on here, but this is what he offered. And look at the green text down here, because this is where it gets wild. This amendment was adopted. This is now what the House bill says, but check this out. The principal at each school may refuse to include any volunteer school chaplain on the list if the principal determines, I'm going to jump to number 2. The principal can get rid of a volunteer chaplain if the principal determines that letting the volunteer school chaplain provide support services or programs to students will be contrary to the pedagogical interests of the school. What does that mean? If you're a principal and there is a humanist chaplain who volunteers to work at your school, or a satanic chaplain that volunteers to work at your school, and they meet all the other criteria, the principal can say, I don't think your values align with our school's values, so you're not allowed to be here. It's creating the opportunity for religious discrimination by the principal. And the other thing it says that I wanted to point out here, it said, oh, I'm sorry, I want to go back up here. Look at what the amendment also says. The new chaplains that are volunteers and would be at the school, they have to be, look at letter B. They have to demonstrate that the volunteer school chaplain is an official member in a local religious group. You have to be an official member in a local religious group. So if you're an atheist chaplain who doesn't belong to a congregation, you're out of luck. You're not allowed to do this. Maybe you're thinking, okay, but technically Satanist chaplains could still come in. They are part of a local religious group. Well, if you scroll down, look what this says. Local religious group, number 2. Local religious group means a religious group that meets at least one time per month within the boundary of the school. And let me jump to 3B. A religious group acknowledges the existence of and worships one or more supernatural entities that possess power over the natural world. You have to believe in some sort of higher power, or you are not allowed to be a chaplain in these schools. Like the way this amendment is written, principals could kick out someone from volunteering if they just say, you don't mesh with our school properly for whatever reason. And the only chaplains who are allowed to do this at all in the state of Arizona would be ones who belong to a religious organization. So no Satanists because they don't believe in a higher power. No atheists because they don't belong to a religious group. It is religious discrimination by a different name. Even beyond that, that amendment also points out that chaplains have to have a graduate degree in either counseling or theology. And I actually like that you have to have a grad school degree in counseling. I'm not sure what a grad school degree in theology is going to do to help you as a counselor or a chaplain. They also say you also could just have 7 years of experience instead. So what if you don't have formal academic credentials, but you've been doing this a long time? That's okay. But think about what that means. The only people who can just be a chaplain with no credentials, you have to have a religious infrastructure in place to give you the opportunity to be a chaplain, which basically excludes minority religions in addition to the non-theistic ones. Unbelievable. So Gress also had in the amendment that you have to have 2 years of experience as a chaplain in a local religious group. Well, guess what? If you don't have a local religious group, or if you're part of a minority group that doesn't need a chaplain because they only have a handful of people in it, also out of luck. Like all the amendments are designed to make sure only Christians are allowed to be on the list. Do you get what they're doing here? Because that's what this amendment is pushing for. It's so illegal. It's blatant discrimination. And by the way, this is not new because in Florida, the law says school districts may have volunteer chaplains. And then Ron DeSantis put out like a model policy that school boards could adopt. And that model policy had some of these rules on there. And Americans United for Separation of Church and State said, hey, this model policy is misguided and unconstitutional. And by the way, I made a video about this months ago, but there were school districts in Florida that decided, yeah, you know what? This is opening a can of worms. There's too many legal problems here. So we're just going to not do this. We're not going to have chaplains in our building. We'll stick to the people who actually know what they're doing. But in Arizona, this revised bill with the amendment that is currently in front of the Arizona House, it would discriminate against atheists, Satanists, humanists, and any other chaplain who is otherwise qualified but doesn't fit the description of what they want in a chaplain, which means it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. The Secular Communities for Arizona, it's a group in that state. They do excellent work. Diane Post is their legal director, and she testified about this bill. And one thing she noted online here, I just want to go to the bottom. Here we go. As a state representative, your duty is to support the Arizona and U.S. Constitution, both of which are godless and entirely secular, and to protect the rights of all citizens, regardless of their religious or non-religious beliefs. Your promotion of religion and Christianity as a false panacea is insulting and demeaning to reason, logic, and to religious and non-religious citizens. Beautifully put. So now, there's a couple questions. Is Arizona going to pass this bill? We'll see what the House does. I believe they have a slight Republican edge there. It'll go back to the Senate. Are they going to approve this now that it says no non-theists are allowed to join? Because that's opening the door to lawsuits. Arizona's governor is a Democrat, Katie Hobbs. I hope she's not planning on signing this even if it passes. But again, the fact that Republicans think they can get away with this is what's disturbing, right? This bill should never even have a chance of reaching her desk. But because Republicans have some power, it might. If you live in Arizona, please contact your state representatives and urge them to vote against this piece of legislation. It creates more problems than it solves. And if you're not sure how to start, again, go visit this group at the bottom, Secular Communities for Arizona, Secular AZ. They do good work. I'm sure they can point you in the right direction. All right, I'm going to stop there with this story. What other questions we got here? I fear kids getting conversion therapy getting pushed on them in schools by chaplains. Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely one of the concerns of letting Christian chaplains in the building. They are not trained to help everybody and to do it in like a neutral way based on best practices. Oh, thanks for that donation. As someone who was depressed suicidal as a teen in Florida, I cannot begin to explain how bad this is. Makes me physically ill. Do not want to think how they make life worse for special ed kid without supports. Yeah, and a lot of these schools don't even have the resources to have all the counselors and social workers that they need. The idea that volunteer chaplains are going to make up for what they aren't investing in, it's never going to happen. I can definitely see how this could be used to exclude mental health care professionals from the schools on the same kind of premise, given they don't believe they need them and use this excuse. Yeah, they're like, yeah, why do we need to bring in people who know what they're doing? We got volunteers to take care of it. That is where they want to go with this. And you could tell it's happening at the federal level too, with Donald Trump saying, let's dismantle the education department, turn it back to the states. Well, this is what the states are doing. It's not going to end well in a lot of places. Yeah, because everyone is welcome here is an opinion. Did you see the story this week about a teacher that had a poster on her wall that said something like that? Everyone is welcome here, and the school made her take it down because that's a political statement. I forgot. I think she pushed back against it, but just a lot of idiots in charge right now, a lot of places. This is going to be so hard on kids with parents who don't take mental health stuff seriously, don't believe in therapy. This is heartbreaking and upsetting. Yeah, could not agree more. There's a lot of parents who might think a chaplain is inherently automatically good, and they're going to want to send their kids to a religious chaplain, not realizing those people don't necessarily know what they're doing. There are no Southern Baptists in Massachusetts, otherwise they'd be screaming from the rooftops. That's for the last story, I think. But yes, the Catholics kind of dominate there. Real question, where do you get all these stories from? Oh, Ryan, thanks for asking that question. It's a mix of, I have a lot of news sources that I follow, and also people like you, people watching these videos, people who read my newsletter, they email me links to stories they see. I don't always respond to your emails, but I read all of them. And a lot of times they have local stories that maybe aren't getting the attention they need. Sometimes there are stories that are getting attention, but maybe they're not because they are coming from mainstream news outlets. They're being covered in a secular way, in a neutral way. And I am not neutral about this stuff. I have an opinion about this stuff. So maybe I think I can offer a better take on it. So that's where these stories are coming from. These are things I found interesting over the course of the week. And a lot of them come from all of you who are watching and who send me links using the contact information in the video description.